most guys, when they hit 41 and 258 pounds, they pick up a hobby, like woodworking or
a motorcycle maybe. They go the other way with it.
Going to the market on Saturday morning and then passing out on the couch Saturday afternoon. Shamil Abdurakhimov is looking to regain a little bit of that magic, a little bit of that wonder, a little bit of that stuff that got him to the UFC. And for Abdurakhimov, he's in search of win number 1 since early 2019. Yeah, he's about 4 years away from wins. His last time out, that time, he beat Marcin Tybura. He's been knocked out 3 times in a row. Once against Curtis Blades, kind of close to home, UFC 242. Ground out, 10-8 round in the first, finished in the second. Next time out, Chris Daukaus, knocked out. Next time out, Sergey Pavlovich. He's going to win the title in 2023. And in those fights, he got knocked out by the same punch. This time, he's taking on Jailton Almeida. So a lot of people are going to be down on Abdurakhimov. He's 5-5 in the UFC. He was a vet of ADFC and M1 Global.
He main evented a UFC show against Derek Lewis years back. Like, people forget Shamil Abdurakhimov at one point was of that level, like a main event caliber fighter.
After losing to Tim Johnson and then winning 2 fights.
And that's the thing. I understand Derek Lewis probably sold 98% of the tickets that were sold for that event, but still, you don't just like make mistakes and then end up in a UFC main event. But my big problem with Abdurakhimov, and here's the thing, I feel like I've given Abdurakhimov a lot of flowers, even in some of his losses. I remember the Chris Daukaus loss where, yes, he did get knocked out, but he was landing a really nice left hook of his own right in that matchup. Against Curtis Blades, there's not a lot of positives to be taken. They fought in a 130-degree stadium. He got taken down like 48 times. It was a really bad performance from him. But my big thing about Abdurakhimov has been, and I brought this up at length in our last prediction video when he fought Pavlovich, he's a good grappler. Like, that is the basis of his game. When he gets on top of guys, he's very heavy. Again, go back to that Derek Lewis fight, because if you just watch the first 4 rounds of that, Shamil is having his way with Derek Lewis. He's taking him down, he's out striking him, he's out clinching him, and he gets a little lazy at the end of the fight and gets knocked out. But my big thing with Abdurakhimov is, he's not the guy that he used to be. I just think that the wrestling tires him out at this stage of his career now. And people like the NBA comps, he reminds me a little bit of Josh Hart at this stage of his career. I really like Josh Hart for all the stuff he can do. Josh Hart doesn't shoot threes anymore. It's weird. Like, he can be wide open on the 3-point line. Guys don't even bother closing out on him because he just passes it. Shamil, and that's a good part of his game. It opens stuff up for his team. It helps everything else flow. When Shamil is wrestling, it helps everything flow. But the problem is, he's a guy who struggled with his cardio in the past, like a lot of heavyweights after the opening 5 minutes, if we're being honest. But his biggest asset leads to his biggest downfall.
So, Matt, when I went back and I did my research for this one, Jailton Almeida, our 2022 Fight Night picks, if you missed it, go back and check out our award show. He was our Rookie of the Year. And Jailton, very, very special fighter, 3-0. He beat Danilo Marquez, who's now with the PFL. He beat Parker Porter when he weighed like 216 and Porter weighed 265. And then he beat Anton Turkalj on short notice, who was replacing Shamil Abdurakhimov. This is the 3rd time this fight's been matched up. They really want Jailton to beat Abdurakhimov to get into the rankings, because for some reason, if you beat Marcin Tybura 4 years ago, you deserve to be still ranked. It was like how Pavlovich was ranked for years, even though he didn't fight. But for Jailton Almeida and for Shamil Abdurakhimov, you know Jailton's bread and butter. He considers himself the Brazilian Khabib. He goes out there, spears you like Edge in the WWE, wraps your legs, you give your back, and then he chokes you out. Or he beats you by ground and pound. For Shamil, this is where I had to go back and think, okay, what's he really good at? Well, his takedowns, and I know he got taken down 5 times against Curtis Blades, and he excelled at it against, like, Walt Harris and Derek Lewis. And then I had to think, what's his bread and butter skill? He's a national master of sport in Wushu Sanda, which is Chinese kickboxing, so a little bit like Muslim Salikov.
Doesn't fight like him, though.
And he's an international master of sport in kickboxing. And he's a 5-time national Sanshu champ, which is what Sanda used to be called, with Shanshu. When the hell has Shamil fought like that?
You're gonna
at
get
a high level.
You're gonna get PO'd. This is why I roll my eyes at a lot of these and bring up some people's credentials. Like, he doesn't fight in that manner. That's the thing. Shamil Abdurakhimov, if you just watch his MMA fights, you'd say he's like a wrestle boxer. I guess the Sambo makes sense with the background, but again, Shamil Abdurakhimov...
No, I didn't even say Sambo.
Sorry, the wrestling in his back pocket makes sense, but the thing about Abdurakhimov is, he's just a classic example of, if he has that wrestling edge, he is going to use it in the majority of his fights. We just haven't seen that. Like, I thought against Chris Daukaus, we were going to see that aggressive version of Abdurakhimov. He has a huge size advantage over him. Daukaus is a slick boxer on the outside. He's very speedy. If Daukaus is going to beat Abdurakhimov, probably going to knock him out using his boxing. And the thing about Almeida, too, like we brought it up at length, it's, hey, if he struggles against Porter, then maybe it's time to go down to 205 and we'll change the career a little bit. He was outweighed by almost 60 pounds by Parker Porter. That fight wasn't competitive at all. Now, I understand Shamil Abdurakhimov got to a higher level than Parker Porter did in the UFC, so this will be a more difficult fight for Jailton Almeida, but he has demonstrated a lot of the skills in the UFC up until this point that lead me to believe that he should be able to have similar levels of success against a guy like Abdurakhimov at this stage of his career.
That's it. I mean, for Abdurakhimov, you might like the striking, but it's less than UFC average, 2.6 strikes landed per minute to 2.8 received, so it's at a negative of 0.2, and the UFC average for and against is 3.4. So he doesn't throw as many strikes as most people in the UFC. His takedown defense is...
But for a heavyweight, those numbers aren't bad, though. Like, that's UFC-wise, so a lot of guys in the lower weight classes are throwing a lot of volume. I don't think Abdurakhimov has bad volume.
But again, we'll have to see what happens in this one, because it's a high motor out of a guy like Malhadinho. But to beat a combat sambo champ and Nasruddinov on Contender Series, to beat guys like Edvaldo de Oliveira outside of the UFC and Ildemar Alcantara, you might go, why are you bringing those guys up? Because they were UFC vets that Almeida beat outside of the UFC. Then he beat a combat sambo champ on Contender Series. Then he beats Danilo Marquez, submission specialist, in his UFC debut. Then he beats a guy that outweighs him by whatever it was, 50 some odd pounds in Porter. Then he beats Turkali, who's a Swedish wrestling champion. I struggle to see Abdurakhimov winning this fight, and I'll just say that. We'll have a look at the Tapology votes, because that's what we do on this channel. I'm going to say over under 85. No, I'm going to say over under 92.5% Almeida.
2.5? No, I'll say over.
92.5%. It's over. 97% of the 947 voters have Almeida to win. 31% by submission, 58% by knockout, 3% of Abdurakhimov to win. Stay away from it, because Malhadinho is a giant favorite. However, I don't see Almeida losing this fight necessarily.
This is what this fight's going to tell us. How is Almeida going to deal with some of the bigger upper echelon heavyweights? I think that this fight might help us kind of dictate where he might belong in this division, because let's say he can't take Abdurakhimov down, has to work from the outside, and we do see him struggle a little bit against a much bigger heavyweight, then it will make us question him moving forward against the Cyril Gans of the world, the Sergey Pavlovich, like big, strong guys for this division.
Well, Tommy Aspinall.
Tom Aspinall's a big guy too. Hopefully his knee gets better at some point soon, but for Almeida, his skill set is very unique for this division, and I do think him being undersized is an asset for him. Like, I know we don't often say this, but in the heavyweight division, there's kind of a level where you're like, hey, you're a little bit too big, you're not as fast as some of the other guys. When you think about the heavyweight goats, it's Fedor, not a big heavyweight, Stipe, not a big heavyweight, Kane, JDS, like none of these guys were tipping the scales at the higher levels. I guess Francis is huge, but other than him, for the most part, it's been athletic guys in this division, and I think the athleticism is going to help Almeida.
Both of us in the matchup going with Jailton Almeida to get the win. Let us know who you have in this matchup. Some big, compelling fights on this card. The Bonfim brothers, Figueiredo taking on Moreno, and Teixeira versus Hill. You're not going to want to miss any of it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say.
Let's get into it.